If something is considered the greatest story ever, does that mean it's also the best story ever? Hello again and welcome back to Graphic Description, and today we're going to take a look at what's considered by many one of the greatest Superman stories ever told, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Before I begin, let's get some quick background. This story took place in 1985-86. This was supposed to be the very last pre-crisis Superman story, because at the time a story called Crisis on Infinite Earths was happening, and what its purpose was to completely reboot the DC universe, even though some of it didn't get rebooted, but that's another story. Our story begins one day when a writer named Tim Crane visits a retired Lois Lane, now Lois Elliott, one day to talk about the last days of Superman. As she begins telling the story, we learn that at first everything's just normal, but then everything starts to get violent very fast in a very tragic way. First, we see the return of Bizarro, and this is the pre-crisis continuity Bizarro. So it's important to remember that a lot of characters in Superman's Rogues Gallery before the reboot were almost as silly as they were in the Silver Age and Golden Age. Pre the 1986 reboot, Bizarro was just a stupid, dopey, childlike creation. In this story, however, he decides to become the perfect Superman. He does this first by attacking Metropolis and knocking over buildings, killing people, and he mistakes people's pleas for mercy and screaming in pain as screams of happiness. We also learned that before he arrived in Metropolis this time, he killed everyone on his planet. And in this story, Superman does something in order to stop Bizarro that he's never done before, and something that he never could do before. And this was just the beginning of the story. I mean, there was the return of Brainiac, Luthor, the Legion of Supervillains, the born-again Kryptonite Man, the Metallos, the prankster and the toy maker, and each of them came back with a new brutality and viciousness that never appeared in any of the Superman stories before. Unlike previous reviews, I'm not going to go too much into the story. I'm just going to say that you should read it because it is a very good story. That said, this story is not reader friendly. You need to keep in mind that this story was basically as a reward to the readers that have been already reading Superman for decades. So if you were just a casual Superman fan and you wanted a story to read, this is not the story to read. You would need to know a whole lot of backstory, and it's a very bad jumping on point. Also, here's something else you should be aware of. This story is only 48 pages long. It was the very last issue of Superman before the reboot. So while there are a lot of characters in this story, you shouldn't expect a significant amount of characterization from them. Basically, the main character is Superman, and that's basically it. So let's look at some pros and cons of this story. Well, one con is the villains like Bizarro and the Toyman and etc. They pop up. they do something real quick and then they disappear after only a couple of pages or 2 or 3 pages. It just seems so abrupt, and while I know it's only 48 pages long, you don't know whatever happened to the villains before. You don't know really why they did what they did, even though you know a little bit, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Because of the lack of characterization with a lot of characters, I'm surprised that at the time DC Comics didn't make a graphic novel of this or have this be a prestige edition or multiple issues or something. Well, let me give a pro. This story was written by Alan Moore and was drawn by George Perez and Curt Swan, a longtime Superman artist. And story-wise, this story was really thought out, just like most of Alan Moore's work. Basically, what we have here is a murder mystery. However, the victim is seeing everyone around them being murdered before they are. And also, Alan Moore brings a different tone to this. This is a very sad, tragic story with everything that's happening to Superman, which is kind of odd that you wouldn't necessarily want him to go out on a big, happy, triumphant note. Even though at the very end of the story, there's a little wink at the end. While I feel there wasn't enough characterization for all the characters in here, I will say that with the supporting characters, you do get a sense of who they are here and how they feel about Superman and why they do what they do. I did have one major question about the story. When did it take place? You would assume this is the last days of Superman, but in this world, Supergirl had just died. She died during a crisis, but she appears with the Legion of Superheroes even though Superman knows that she's dead. Shouldn't the space-time continuum, shouldn't there be another reality? It just seemed kind of inconsistent, because I think this story was actually supposed to be part of the last story of the Superman continuity. So crisis had to happen. It's just confusing, and I wish Alan Moore had fixed that. Okay, here's another pro that I like. The final villain. I did not see that coming. The villain is the last person that you would actually suspect. And the reason why the villain's doing what they're doing is a total shock. And I'm actually surprised, considering how dark the current DC universe is, why they didn't take this avenue with this particular villain as well. One of the best moments in the story that I feel is Superman's reunion with the Legion of Superheroes and the return, even though briefly, of Supergirl. I believe that was one of the most emotional and powerful moments there. And you need to take a look at the last page of part 1 and you'll see the Man of Steel bend. Another moment that I really liked in the story is Superman's realization of the whole Lois, Lana, and him love triangle. This happens while he's talking with Perry, and this finally puts a close to the entire running subplot that had been going on for really decades. Just a little minor thing. After reading the story, I wish that Alan Moore had actually done a run on Superman. Just imagine where he could have taken the character and the other characters here. The sad thing is, with his type of writing style and thoughtfulness, there was no way that pre-crisis DC would have let him do this. Post-crisis, maybe, but now that he hates DC Comics and comics in general, I guess that's never going to happen. Okay, here's a minor nitpick that I have, and it's about the art. when we see the final villain and when the final villain shows their true form, there's no transition with the transformation. It just comes out of nowhere and it's kind of jarring. Just one more random thought. In the story, during the story, Superman is forced to kill because he has no other choice. And people that love this story don't seem to have that big a problem with it. Yet, in the Man of Steel movie, he's Superman for less than a day. He's going up against someone who's literally born and bred to kill him, and he's forced to kill this person, and everyone's losing their mind about it. I just find that kind of ironic and a bit hypocritical. So, do I recommend this story? Yes. It's interesting because I've been an active comics reader since 1989, but it wasn't until 2009 when I finally read this Alan Moore's scripted story. I always known about it, but for some reason, I never got my hands on this story. Mostly because it was either out of print or it cost so much that I couldn't afford to buy it. Oh, and just one more thing. If you want to know what really happened to Superman after his final battle in this issue, just take a look at the last 3 pages. That's all I'm saying. And until next time, please subscribe, comment, and tell me what other books you want me to review. And goodbye.